Oh, great.
I am really, really happy to be talking to you, Tom, today. You are a podcaster, you are on the radio, you are doing everything. What do you do and what is your business about?
Well, yes, Nour, thanks for having me on your program here. And so I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Tom Greene on LinkedIn. I'm also on Twitter and Instagram. My Twitter profile is at TomTV23, as well as at Tom Greene Pod for the Tom Greene Podcast. And I currently work at WLEW Radio in Bad Axe, Michigan as a news reporter and on-air talent. So that's really a lot about my business, if you want to call it that, and what I do. So I do a lot of talking. That's definitely a good way to put it.
So lately you moved from, or you got a move from broadcasting to the radio. How did that happen?
So yes, back in July of 2019, I had actually worked at a Kroger store, which, for those that don't know, is a super grocery supermarket in Michigan, the United States. And I left that job because I had done a lot of college work in broadcasting, and I thought, it's time to go shoot for the stars. And so what I did was I really upped my podcast, which I had done that for a few years. And my supervisor, Kelly Carpenter, on our radio station, heard one of my podcasts and emailed me and said, "You want a job in news?" And right at the time, I was in the middle of doing a project for Essexville Garber, which was my old high school, doing their football season over my podcast. And I said, "I'll get back with you after the football season. I am interested." Sure enough, no other doors opened because of that, because I was hoping that another door would open from the podcast. That door opened, so I decided to walk right through. And 9 months later, here we are.
Fantastic. So let's get to your podcast. What is it about?
Sure. So my podcast, which I've run for a few years now, in fact, one of the first podcasts back in 2016, I ran out of my old truck, a 1994 Ford Ranger. The truck was actually older than me. So on the podcast, I talk about the American major sports. We talk about Major League Baseball, the NBA, NHL, as well as the NFL. I mainly did Lions and Michigan Wolverines podcast, which I also do college football and basketball. But in 2018, I decided to expand my podcast into the major sports, and I've had varying guests on the show from show to show. So it's all about the 4 American major sports.
Fantastic. How did you publicize your podcast? How did you advertise it?
How did I publicize or advertise the show? It's more of word of mouth. Back in 2018 is when I really started to grow the show. I actually made my own accounts for the podcast over Twitter, over Facebook and Instagram, and it started to grow some popularity, and also as well as this LinkedIn, which in fact, my professor, Bill Williamson, out of Saginaw Valley State, required us to make a LinkedIn for our internship class. And so I made one, and after I got my job at WLEW, I decided to really open up to new connections, hence why we come onto this show. But besides the point, really more of word of mouth and building up the professional network, and to where it's grown to where it is right now, almost 7,000 plays on Apple, and we're rolling pretty strong. We still don't have any sponsorships or anything like that, but I'm on the radio. My voice is getting out there, which is really the main point.
Fantastic. How important or how effective was networking until now?
How effective was networking until now? It had its ups and downs. Really, networking, for those that are listening, it's building and growing relationships. Sometimes it's not so much how many people you know, it's how exactly you use those connections. As I've said before in a couple of my LinkedIn posts, in the words of Eric Clapton, it's in the way that you use it. And how I've been able to do that is, of course, my supervisor hearing one of my podcasts, as well as talking professionally to some people over LinkedIn about my own podcast, having them appear on the podcast. And of course, and I'll even add our pre-conversation as well, how you had reached out to me wanting you to come on this show, which I had agreed to. And so it's really the way that you use the connections that you grow, and who you know really helps. So quality over quantity, but knowing people anywhere really helps.
How did you invite guests to your show?
Well, a lot of the time I would find out what they're doing, like on LinkedIn. I will throw an example out there. Tyler Baronsky, who I had on the show a couple of months ago, who now works at Negm as a producer. I had to kind of scan his LinkedIn profile, and he had messaged me first saying, "Hey, I'm available to come on your podcast anytime." And so I kind of looked up what he was doing, and I would find topics that relate to them as well as sports topics. Like, per se, Tyler is more involved in Boston sports, so we talked a little bit about Boston sports, and as well as the new job and all that. So really, it's more of the connection, what the connection is doing, what the connection is interested about. It's really more guest centric, at least in my view. I'm kind of just the revolving host, I guess, and have a revolving door of guests on the show. That's kind of how I've structured the show the past couple of seasons.
Oh yeah. And what kind of broadcasting do you want to develop?
So really my hope, and my hope was ever since I was in 7th grade when I was 13, which has been for 12 years now, I really wanted to get into the sports broadcasting world, whether it be radio, TV, journalism, which in fact, Essexville Garber High School, for those that are unaware, has a Fox Sports reporter named John Morosi that graduated from there in the year 2000 and gotten to learn a lot from what he's done in his career. So journalism, really more of the sports type broadcasting. And of course, news is always a fallback, which I've had to use, and it's definitely helped, especially in this time of COVID-19.
Okay, what are the main requirements to be able to get that post or get that direction?
So if we're talking like regular broadcasting, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So yes. So requirements for really radio or voice broadcasting is a good voice. Like you can hear that my voice is kind of more peppy, a little bit deeper, but more peppy. And you can hear that personality as well. You have good personality traits. You need to be able to talk to people. You need to be able to resonate with people, which is part of networking. Because if you can network well, that means you have a good personality, and people either like or don't like you. Some people do, a love-hate relationship. And you need to be able to, let's see, yes, know a little bit about news or sports, depending on what you want to do. But really, voice and personality is really where it starts. Because on-air talent, you need to be personable and be able to have your listener be interested in what you are talking about. Otherwise, they're going to just change the station.
Yeah, so I have two questions here. Number one, how do you get the knowledge for what you're going to talk about? Number two, how can you make it interesting to the audience?
Sure. So first, this is kind of a two-answer type of question. The first route I'll go is on-air entertainment talent, and that is you can go many different ways with on-air entertainment. Like at WLEW, we transition out of a song and into another song. Sometimes I have looked on a website called Song Fact and found an interesting fact about said song and share it with the audience. Or sometimes I would share a personal anecdote, like, for example, I'm Not in Love by 10cc. If you've ever seen the original Guardians of the Galaxy, that is the song that plays when Peter, the main character, loses his mother in a battle with cancer. That's an anecdote that resonates with me in that song. So anecdotes or song facts really helps. Or and the thumb area really wants you to hammer these out. Like nowadays we have pop-up food pantries in the thumb area for those that are in need, especially during this time of COVID-19. We can talk about those that are happening in the area. So really personal anecdote, facts about the song, or local area events that are happening or for on air. If we're talking sports, and you have a sports rate and you have a sports program, you can always look up stats and information. Which stats are good, and you have to be kind of stat centric, but you can't revolve your show around stats because Nick Wright on Fox Sports does that, and sometimes it can get really annoying. So be friendly to, of course, be audience centric and really find out what your audience wants. And that's kind of goes for both entertainment and sports. Is really know your stuff, but not entirely, of course. Resonate with your audience and be yourself. That's another thing. I think you have another question about that coming up. But yes, authenticity is a big thing, whether it be entertainment, news, or sports.
So, according to your experience so far with the podcasting and with the broadcasting, like, have you improved your job to the point you are satisfied with it now?
I would say yes. I've really improved very well. Now, of course, personally, I still want to get into the sports broadcasting world, but of course, with sports being shut down, sort of due to COVID-19, it's gradually coming back. I still want to get into a sports talking role, whether that's ESPN or Fox Sports or Barstool Sports here in the United States, or I could always go somewhere else if need be. Like I've watched Sky Sports England telecasts. I'm certain, and of course, I won't put words into your mouth, but I have a feeling that because you are Egyptian, one of your favorite players is Mo Salah from Liverpool. I actually went to Ann Arbor to Manchester United and Liverpool. I'm a United fan, and there were so many Liverpool fans that were chanting Mo Salah, Mo Salah, and so you could tell the hype around Salah was amazing. But besides the point, I'm transferable. I can move to a different sports network if need be, but really mainly sports. But I am happy with news right now, especially in this time of COVID-19, because it's kept me safe and in one area of the world where Huron County is pretty safe. In fact, I tell people when I was hired full-time in January, I entered the bubble 10 weeks before everybody else did. So it helps that I am in an area where I'm safe and I can really improve my craft. And a lot of people have really enjoyed the newscasts that I have delivered because of the style, my reading style.
Fantastic. What are the requirements to work on the radio?
So to work on the radio, like entertainment radio, as I had said before, voice and personality and some knowledge about news or sports. If you're looking for more of the news cycle, really look up names and current events, like the Associated Press. Really, we read from the American Associated Press, which is quite center of the spectrum, especially here in America. You're right. So a lot of people are to the right, which I lean more to the right than left. A lot of people are to the left, and neither really like each other. The Associated Press is middle of the road, and that's really what you want to look at as far as news stories. But you also have to look at names and really naming pronunciations correct, because especially around here, if somebody says the vice presidential candidate Kamala Harris, that's going to sound really bad. Kamala Harris is the actual name of the Democrats' vice presidential candidate. So knowing names really helps, but pronunciation is that for news. For sports, use personal anecdotes, look up stats, and be yourself, really, because authenticity. And Dawn Mitchell told this to me from Fox 9 in Minneapolis, fellow connection. People can smell fake a mile away. So be yourself wherever you go. And that's what I have to say for both entertainment, news, and sports.
Fantastic. What challenges have you been through this fantastic journey so far?
Challenges were especially when I joined WLEW is at the radio station. A lot of radio stations, you have to work 6 days a week in what you do. And that takes a lot of dedication. In fact, my supervisor had said that broadcasters are supposed to work 45 hours a week, no overtime, which is technically illegal because after 40 hours in America, you're supposed to get overtime. Thankfully, somebody fought that in the 90s and won. But besides the point, working 6 days a week is hard because you have to really dedicate yourself to this station and to this craft. And I've done this a lot with the podcast, but it's just taking the dedication, the time, the effort that you have to put in is a lot different than what you'd expect. Besides that challenge, it's getting along with different teams, because you bounce from team to team, especially a lot of players, and you have to have that good team chemistry. Before COVID-19, I would say the WLEW team chemistry was not that good, but we've really thought to ourselves, once COVID hit, hey, we're all in this together. We need to really band together and get along very well. And so far, the office has gotten a lot better. So it's really more of schedule and office politics, which might not resonate very well with a lot of interviewers. But as I've said in this interview so far, honesty is the best policy. Authenticity is what you need. So that's what I would say.
Perfect. What are the criteria of a good podcast?
A good podcast, I'd say more authenticity and personality and anecdotes, kind of like I had said before on the radio. Now, of course, podcasts, when you're talking for, at least on my podcast, you're talking for 20, 30 minutes or even longer. Like I've had a 2-hour podcast before. Sometimes you kind of go off track, which that's okay. Don't ever be afraid to go off track with a podcast episode, because a lot of times you will find yourself talking about different things that people might really like to hear. And that's something that can really resonate with others. And even in this interview, I've kind of veered off course a couple of times and talked about some personal anecdotes. That can really resonate with a lot of people. Now, some people might be turned off by it, but their attention span just isn't where it needs to be for a podcast. So authenticity and personality are vital in that. In sports podcasts, it's good. It's how your material is presented, really. If you have good material for a preview show, like most of my podcasts are game previews, and you bring in certain guests for an opposing view, because I always like to have the opposing view, like Detroit versus, let's say, New England. I would bring in fellow connection Meredith Gorman out of the New England Sports Network. So really authenticity, and don't be afraid to go off track, because sometimes you can really, those moments can really resonate more than the actual question.
Awesome. How can you increase or widen your popularity on the radio?
How do I create popularity on the radio? Almost kind of the same answer as the last one, with authenticity and personal anecdotes. In fact, I will give you a good example of that. A few weeks ago, I had talked about the song Get Up by Shinedown, and I had mentioned ESPN reporters Laura Rutledge, Marcus Spears, Dan Orlovsky, Mina Kimes, and a few others who are doing a new edition of NFL Live on ESPN. Well, I posted that to my Twitter, and Marcus Spears, who is also known as Swagoo, had seen that and said, "Hey, we appreciate you, boss man." And in about a month, I'll be actually recording a show with Marcus Spears because of that. So it's really, popularity comes from authenticity and being yourself, really. It's a lot of that. Don't be afraid to talk on the radio and be yourself. The mic is there. Remember, the mic is hot, but the mic is there, and you're talking to a group of people that are interested in what you want to say.
Fantastic. How do you usually work on improving your skills and performance?
So developing my skills, I'm sure you've heard the phrase "practice makes perfect."
Oh yeah.
And in that case, my old band director, Mr. Lewis, had always said, "Perfect practice makes perfect." Now, you don't necessarily have to be perfect in delivering a line or news story, but getting comfortable with talking on the radio and speech class, that's a big thing, especially for those that are in school listening to the show. Speech class. Take at least multiple speech classes. Talk to yourself in front of the mirror, because that helps. Rehearse, rehearse, rehearse. So really practice talking on the radio, or even talk to somebody on the phone. Talk to your mother for a half hour. Talk to your father for a half hour. Talk to a family member that's just sitting there for a while. That can really help get you to where you want to be in broadcasting. And just practice, practice, practice.
Some broadcasters or people on the radio, after they become famous or have enough popularity, change jobs and become especially actors. Do you think about that?
That is an interesting question, because I never really thought about that until you had given me the set of questions that you were going to ask on the show. But it's actually very interesting. Like you had said, other people have become actors in the broadcast world. In fact, I'll give you an example. Ronald Reagan. was the governor of California, became the president of the United States in the 1980s. He was an actor before he went into politics. So you're right in the sense that people change jobs every now and again. And acting is something that I could be interested in. I will be honest, remembering lines is kind of tough because I can read a page and I could almost instantly forget what was read on the page. So my retention is not as strong as it really should be, but I can always work on that. So acting is something that I could be interested in. My half-brother is actually a screenwriter out in Los Angeles. So if I were to be interested in that field, I have a contact, I could do it. So my official answer is I haven't thought about it, but you've got me thinking.
Fantastic. Okay, now you are a podcaster, you are a broadcaster as well. You have enough knowledge about the sports world. Interview me about Mo Salah and Liverpool for 5 minutes. Go ahead.
So yes, Nour. So you have come from Egypt. So I'm interested in knowing, did you really know a lot about Mo Salah before he hit the international waves and became a Liverpool star like he has been?
Yeah, like usually people, players who play well and they can score fantastic goals, usually the fans know about them and the press speaks about them and they are on TV, especially if they score against the main teams in Egypt, Al Ahly or Zamalek or Ismaili. So when you have players from the smaller teams, if I may say so, and scoring against these big clubs, then the fans of these big clubs are so many, and then they start being angry about these players and they, oh yeah, we can buy him and then he can score goals for us. So yeah, he was famous for us. He was well known, and it's like an important story because he comes from Al-Mawlin Al-Arab, or the Arab contractors. That's the name of his first parent club, and this club is so famous for building and generating very fantastic talents in the soccer world. Like we had another player in Arsenal, Mohamed Al-Neni also. He comes from this club. And we have the best or the most famous player in Egypt, Mohamed Outreka. He played also on an international level. So yeah, like this club is so famous with building young talents so well.
Gotcha. Another question I would have is, is it a surprise to you that Salah was part of the first Liverpool team to bring home an English Premier League championship in 30 years to the famed Beatles' hometown?
Okay, actually, if we look at the current Liverpool team and especially Jurgen Klopp, mainly it's Jurgen Klopp. Jurgen Klopp is the miracle and the culture of the club, because this club is different from the others as they depend on science and they depend on studies, and they don't, for example, depend on explosive players or these fantastic extraterrestrial players who have unknown skills, but they take normal people, normal players. Yeah, they have skills, they are talented, and then they mold them, they give them the chance, they develop them until they can compete with the best. And that is the best about the club. That is the best about Jurgen Klopp, because if you look at the players on the pitch, for example, the forwards, the strikers, or the midfield, they are not that very huge names in the world of football. Like if you go to other clubs, Paris Saint-Germain, Mbappe, Neymar, like $20 billion or something. You get my point. If you go to Real Madrid, at the back you have Sergio Ramos, you have Varane, you have Pepe, and all of these fantastic players. But in Liverpool, the culture is different. It's about a different building, a different culture, and the science that can take, let's say, usual players and make them the best in the field.
Yes, and the thing about PSG and Bayern too is, oh, you didn't win the Champions League, you're fired. The same thing with Real Madrid, and how ironic that PSG and Bayern are going to be in the Champions League final this Sunday. And so the other question I would have for you is, Alex Song has made the lasting impact in Cameroon. Like for me, if you think Cameroon, the first thing you think of is Alex Song. Mm-hmm. Will Mo Salah have that type of effect on Egyptian football, or will he have an even better effect than Alex Song has for Cameroon?
Okay, that's a very difficult and very challenging question. Okay. Yeah, the point with Mo Salah, like he comes at a very critical time. Like we usually had a very strong national team. We even managed to go 3-4 with Brazil, like 5 years ago in the last World Cup in South Africa. But currently the Egyptian team is quite weak. So the problem is he may not be able to have similar achievements to other local players who, for example, got the African Cup three times or 4 times. So maybe this is the main challenge. Yeah, he has made a miracle and he won the Champions League and he won the Premier League. But until now, it's important to win a cup for the Egyptian national team to compete on the Egyptian scale.
Yes, very good, very good. Honestly, that's about all I had after that. That's a good spur of the moment little interview about Salah. You definitely got me thinking, and that was definitely a good 5 to 8 minutes there of talk about Egyptian football, African football too.
Yeah. Okay. So, it has been really great for me talking to you, Tom.
Yeah.
Yeah. Would you like to add something else before we go?
Sure. One last thing is, yes, great thanks to you, Nour, for having me on your program. As said earlier in the show, my Twitter and Instagram is at TomTV23, and for the podcast is at TomGreenePod. Feel free to add me on LinkedIn if you're listening to the show and have not connected with me. Open to new connections. And definitely looking forward to people. Well, hopefully this will inspire a lot of people to get into the broadcasting world, our conversation here today. Very good to be on this show, and thanks again for having me on, Nour.
Thank you for your really pleasurable attendance and the pleasurable attitude.
Thanks a lot. Very good show.
Thank you, Tom.